Hey folks, Durban is currently experiencing a record heat wave, so I have a ceiling fan going above me to prevent myself from passing out, because that's how hot the weather is right now. Anyway, on to the video. One of the reasons that it is easy for liars, both inside South Africa and internationally, to deny that this country is failing is that because of what happens here and how extreme the crime is, when someone like me talks about it, I sound insane because of just how extreme the levels of criminality are. Even for me, as somebody who has lived in South Africa literally my entire life, the levels of criminality we are now witnessing are beyond even my ability to understand. It is genuinely like living in some form of absurd cartoon because the evil is so apparent and so stark, and yet nothing is done about it. For example, South Africans have now been told, essentially, that the entire South African police force, right down to the bottom and right up to the top, the whole institution of the South African Police Service, as it is actually known, is compromised because many police openly operate with criminal gangs. And when I say openly, I mean it because what tends to happen is that if you happen to witness a police officer engaging in criminal activity in South Africa, you've got two choices. If you're lucky, that high ranking police official will offer to pay you off. They'll hand you a little brown envelope, and the idea is that you take the money and you shut your mouth. The other option, which is happening more and more frequently, is that there's no brown envelope. You just catch a bullet, and that's that. And this is becoming more and more widespread across South Africa. And it is relatively easy for corrupt politicians and dodgy policemen to hide because South Africa is already one of the most violent countries on earth. So they can just write it off as another statistic. And it doesn't stop there because it's not just our police service that is compromised. Almost every element of our national government is either collapsing or simply a vehicle for corruption, which is being directly enabled by members of the African National Congress. And it's corruption to levels that are almost impossible to understand. Billions of rand every year just disappear, just vanish. And then, when there is enough political pressure, the ANC will decide, okay, we'll finally set up a commission to investigate. But that in itself is also just a show, because to this point in post democracy South Africa, we have had multiple commissions of inquiry where they are usually investigations led by retired judges. And so what happens is that millions of rand get spent on setting up these commissions and having all these legal experts sit on panels and question people who are implicated in criminal behavior, usually people who are directly tied to politics and tied to the African National Congress itself. So they sit in these long hearings, giving detailed testimony about what they have or have not done. And then after that, recommendations are made to the president based upon those findings, and then nothing happens. Literally nothing. We already had one commission called the Zondo Commission because it was led by a retired judge with the surname Zondo, which is generally how they name these things. They name them after the judge in charge. And the Zondo Commission found that basically most members of the executive of the African National Congress are criminals. This is public knowledge. Yet those recommendations went nowhere because the fundamental problem with these commissions, and it's a problem which I believe is included by design, is that these commissions, when they are set up, have no binding authority to punish anyone. All they can do is investigate and then return their findings to the president. So, in effect, what you have is the government investigating its own corruption and then doing nothing about it over and over and over. And this is what I think people outside of South Africa don't understand. Because as bad as the Western world is becoming, because of things like politicians that betray the mandate of their people and facilitate mass immigration from countries that don't share their values, as bad as all that is, Western nations still have a degree of order and stability that is almost entirely absent from South Africa and the rest of the continent more broadly. If you are not South African and you have no direct experience of life in this country, you cannot understand the levels of evil and corruption that take place here. And it's gotten to the point where if you are South African and have lived here your entire life, like I have, you're not even surprised by it anymore. You aren't surprised that people just end up dead when they start asking questions. You aren't surprised that billions of rand are misappropriated and not used for their intended purpose, and that they just disappear into some Swiss bank account somewhere. What surprises you is when anyone is actually punished. And in South Africa, when punishment does happen, what takes place usually is that some low level functionary takes the fall. And we never actually find out who ordered them to do what they did and why. That is always kept a secret because when reports are written about these things by government, especially now in this era of South Africa, those reports are almost immediately sealed and never shown to the public. So again, it's like what I said earlier. The government investigates itself and finds essentially no wrongdoing. And that is what makes South Africa different to the rest of the world. Because at least in the rest of the world, when a politician is found guilty of enough crimes, there is a chance he will face consequences. In South Africa, it's gotten to the point where politicians can almost just come right out and say, yes, I did that. Yes, I stole that money. What the fuck are you going to do about it? And that's the situation in which we find ourselves.